Well, the U.S. has launched a fourth round of strikes in a week against Houthi targets in Yemen. U.S. Central Command says that the strikes took out 14 missiles that were loaded and ready to be fired. And it follows a Houthi attack that struck a U.S.-owned and operated commercial ship in the Gulf of Aden. So joining us here in Studio 57 is Sam Vinograd. She's a former Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism, Threat Prevention and Law Enforcement at the Department of Homeland Security. Thanks for joining us. All right, so many people would have heard about the Houthis several years ago when they were battling Saudi Arabia. They were running around in flip-flops. Not the same Houthis anymore. These strikes on Houthi targets, are they likely to work?
What we have to keep in mind is that when we talk about the Houthis is we're not just talking about the Houthis, Anne-Marie. We're talking about Iran. And today, as the Houthis continue to launch destabilizing strikes in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and related waters, the Iranians continue to resupply the Houthis with weapons and likely with money. We've seen operations over the past several days in which weapons were captured on their way to Yemen, funded and likely shipped by the Iranians. And so as long as Iran continues to back the Houthis, we will likely see them continue to be successful in trying to strike targets.
Mm-hmm. So, and why isn't Saudi, Anne-Marie brought up Saudi Arabia. For many, many years, we watched as Saudi Arabia bombed the Houthis. They don't seem to be playing a role here, at least from what I can tell. Why is that?
Well, as you articulate, Vlad, the Saudis have been locked in conflict with the Houthis for a long time, and that should be informing how the U.S. government and its coalition partners are thinking about trying to stop Houthi behavior. What we don't know, Vlad, is what is happening privately with the Saudis. And as the American public tries to understand the role that the Saudis are playing, they can't assume that we're hearing everything that's happening between Secretary of State Blinken as well as the president in terms of communications with the Saudis. I think it is highly unlikely that the United States and the UK would have gone ahead with the first round of strikes without getting some kind of, if not approval, but okay from the Saudis to move forward in this regard.
What do the Houthis want? I know they're positioning themselves as sort of taking, this is a response to Israel's attack on Gaza. But is that all that it is? Or do they want something else as well?
I don't buy that. The Houthis are not just attacking U.S. flagged vessels or Israeli flagged vessels. The Houthis are launching incredibly destabilizing attacks against a range of targets and don't appear to be backing down. So what the Houthis want ultimately is likely in this case what the Iranians want, which is to wreak havoc, to strike targets that are perceived to harm U.S. standing in the world, and of course to harm Israeli standing as well. So we have to bring this back to whatever the Iranian calculus is. Now, the interesting thing is, Iran appears to be really overextending itself in a lot of ways. The Iranians are backing the Houthis are being hit. The Iranians are backing proxies in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. There are counterstrikes being launched against Iranian-backed proxies in those areas. And at the same time, Iran launched cross-border strikes against Pakistan. So at a certain point, we have to ask ourselves, how many fronts can Iran open? And don't let me forget that Iran is actually involved as well with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And at a certain point, Iran is going to be involved in multiple tit-for-tat operations around the world, which could lead to an overextension.
So, Sam, one of the things that I think the American people are concerned about is not just the expansion of the actions that Israel is taking in Gaza to a wider conflict, but also threats that may occur here in the United States. I grew up in the 1970s when Yasser Arafat was in charge of the PLO. There were multiple hijackings, there were multiple bombings that happened all over the world. And what was happening between the Israelis and the Palestinians there was nothing on the scale of what we see today. So I do wonder if there is concern, the Department of Homeland Security, what are your sources telling you at the FBI about threats that they are tracking? Because I gotta believe, I want to be an optimist here, but it seems like we're in a very scary moment.
Well, having been in the conversations in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, Hamas's terrorist attack against Israel, I can tell you that trying to prevent and mitigate any retaliatory response by Iran and its proxies, as well as any other terrorist group, literally led off the conversations that we were having, because the safety and security of the American people is foremost for the administration. We have to remember that Iran has both the proven intent and capability to launch attacks or inspire attacks all around the world, not just in the region. In the region, the immediate targets that the administration has been primarily concerned about are embassies and consulates. We saw Iranian-backed proxies, for example, strike a consulate in Erbil in northern Iraq, but embassies and consulates, as well as military bases in the region. At the same time, here in the homeland, there is a fear that Iran could try to inspire what we call homegrown violent extremists, individuals here with no actual ties to Iran, but inspire individuals to conduct attacks here in the homeland, primarily individuals in very small groups, which are more difficult to track, which is why the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and others have warned state and local law enforcement to be incredibly cautious right now in terms of looking for threats. That is why the Department of Homeland Security has ensured that our Border Patrol agents have rules in place about what to look out for as individuals are trying to travel here to the homeland. And that's why the State Department, Department of Defense, and members of the intelligence community are very carefully looking at threats in the region to embassies and consulates and military bases and thinking about what our diplomatic presence looks like and whether any additional security assets would be helpful to try to mitigate risk.
30 seconds, Sam, before we go. But if this war does become a wider conflict, is Israel on their own, much like they were during, let's say, the Yom Kippur War, the 7-Day War? In other words, this is an election year. The president probably does not want any boots on the ground, any body bags with American flags draped over them coming home.
The president has made very clear that he and the administration will stand with Israel, as have other countries around the world. So I don't think that Israel is on its own. Israel is supported by its partners here in the United States and will continue to be.
All right, Sam Vinograd, always great to have you in the studio. Yeah, great.